Hello everyone, this is Ellie Mae with Silhouette Secrets Plus, and today I'm going to show you, using just a few simple tools in the Silhouette software, how you could create this design that is the text welded into a shape. I see this question asked often on my Facebook group and other groups, so I thought I'd do a quick tutorial and show you how to do it. The first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to start with a new design mat, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this to fit into a space on an object that I've measured out, and I have my design space that I know is going to be a 4 by 8 space. So I'm going to start by just using the draw rectangle tool on the left hand side. I'm going to draw a rectangle any size, and then I can change the size under the transform panel on the right side, and the scale tab is the second tab at the top, or you can find it at the quick access toolbar at the top as well. I'm going to change the width to 8 inches and the height to 4 inches. I have measured my blank, and this is the space that I know I have to work with in the design. And then I'm going to show you something here. Most often what I find is people have typed out, I'm going to type a name, and they are trying to weld this name to just a plain rectangle. And what happens when you weld to a plain rectangle, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to change this font so it's a little scripty font. See if we can find, this one will work as an example for us. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this and make a copy. And then I am going to, for this one, you can see that my E is not touching my L. All of the rest of the letters are touching, so they will weld. If I right click and I choose Ungroup, I hold my Shift key down, I can click on that E, it's going to deselect it, but the rest of my letters are still selected. So I can use my little arrow key and I can bump this over. Now this is going to vary just depending on the font style you have. What you'll see here is it's not going to be perfect, but I'm using this just as an example. And then I'm going to select everything. I left clicked and dragged my mouse across everything, so all of them are selected, and then I can right click and choose weld. So now any overlapping text is now welded together. The most common thing I see is someone trying to weld just to one individual shape. And I'm going to show you what happens when you try to do that. So if I select both of those and I choose weld, it's going to combine those two shapes and my text disappears because it is a single shape, and what you're telling the software to do is to combine those two shapes. So I am going to use my friend, the undo button, and we're going to fix this. First, I'm going to grab a copy of this original text. I always make a copy because once you change your text in any way, such as welding or ungrouping, it is no longer editable text. And then I'm going to go up here to my library and I'm going to pick a font that I was working with earlier. So this is going to be the font that we want to work with. I want to change this in a couple of different ways. Now, you'll notice that some of the spacing, the character spacing here, is a little bit too close in some areas. So I can first start in the text style panel and I can increase that spacing just a little bit. But now you can see, hold on one second, you have to select the object and then increase your spacing. 105 is just a little bit too much. It goes up in 5 increments. It works a little better for some of the areas over here and for the Y to the N, but for the A and the Y, it just doesn't work right. But we can still work with this. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to choose Ungroup, and it's no longer editable text. It is now a vector design. But now I can work with these letters individually. I'm going to select the Y and A, and use my arrow keys, and I'm just going to move this over so it has a smoother connection here between the A and the Y. I might bump this little A over just one or two bumps, so it's a little bit smoother connection here. And then the same thing with my L. I'm going to go to the right with my arrow key just a little bit. Now, because I want it to weld to a frame, I really want the entire word connected. And you're really just going to have to play with the font style that you have chosen, because all fonts are going to be different. For instance, my name is Ellie. It starts with an E, so I know very much that E's are very difficult to find a great one in a script font. They don't always weld to other letters well or look good when they are welded. Sometimes the top of the E is too close to the top of the next letter. With all of these letters selected, I can then use my arrow keys and move this over. And when you're using the arrow keys, if you hold them down, they can go a little too far. But now I can make it so that it overlaps here. And the reason I bring this up is just each font style is going to vary depending on what you pick. So the character spacing, you may need to do a little bit of adjusting, and it can be done if you ungroup first and then weld. Once you have your entire text how you'd like it, I'm going to select everything, right click, and choose weld. Now you should see those red cut lines in between the letters disappear. All the text has to be selected, and it will weld the text that is overlapping. So I'm going to go ahead and just fill this with color with my fill color panel on the right hand side. See how it looks. I usually fill it with black, but this will give you an idea of how it will look in whatever color that you're going to cut it out of. Now, since we have our name ready to go, as I showed you at the beginning of the video, I can't simply just weld this to a single rectangle. So what I need to do is, there are a couple ways you can do this. We can right click and choose duplicate, and then we can scale it down using the corner bounding box, and I can select both and then center align. You need two rectangles together. That's the goal we're looking for. Depending on what you want your finished project to look like will depend on which tool that you want to use. So this is one way. You duplicate it and then scale it down. If you don't like that look, you could increase the size of it on the middle bounding box here, and then once again select both and use your center tool to center those. So what we're trying to do here is to create a frame that we can weld the text to. So that's one way. I'm going to delete this. The other way is to select your box and to use your offset tool. Now, since I resized my outside box to the specific dimensions that I wanted, 4 by 8, I'm going to choose the internal offset. And then I'm going to change the number to a different internal offset. So I'm just going to randomly choose 0.4. I want to select both of the rectangles that we have, and I want to just make sure with the center align that they are still centered together. Then I want to right click and choose Make Compound Path. And what this does is it takes our two single rectangles and it's going to turn it into a frame. And we can see this if I undo here twice. We have two single rectangles. You can see one selection box around the inside rectangle and one selection box on the outside. If I select my inside, this is for demonstration only, so you can see the visual of it. So I have my inner square or rectangle is red. My outer rectangle is black. I have two separate rectangles. If I select them both, right click and make compound path, it's going to cut the center rectangle out of the middle of that outer rectangle. So now I have a frame. Now I have a completed shape that my text can be welded to. So I'm going to move my text up into my area, and I'm going to adjust it as needed. Some text you can stretch it and see how it looks to see what it's going to look like. Some text looks okay when it's stretched one direction. Other text styles do not. So you really just have to play with your text. And I'm going to zoom in here. And what I want is I want to make sure, first I'm going to center this, select them both and center it and see how it looks. And then what you need to have is you need to have your text overlapping your frame. Wherever it overlaps on the frame, it's going to weld together. So if I left click, or if I select both of them and then left click and choose weld, now it's all going to cut as one piece. I now have a text that is going to cut all in one motion for my design. So your text is welded into a shape. You can do this with all different kinds of shapes. I'm actually going to undo this, go back to before I welded it. So if you are welding or changing a design in any way, before you weld an object, it's always a good idea to make a copy. And I will have many copies just sitting outside in my holding area as I design. The reason you want to make a copy is because once it's welded and you save that file, you cannot undo that weld. So you would have to start over with it. So what I'm going to do, come back in here, I made my copy, I'm going to choose weld. So this one is going to cut all as one piece. I want to show you with a demonstration, you can do this with any shape. So I'm going to draw a circle. Oh, let's try an oval. I'm going to draw an oval. You can either duplicate it, so right click and duplicate, and then make your oval smaller and center it. Or you can use the internal offset or offset. Either one will work depending on what the size you want. So if I do an internal offset, we'll just choose 0.4 again. I'm going to make sure those two ovals are centered together. Right click with both of them selected and choose Make Compound Path. The way to test and make sure your compound path has worked is to then fill it with color so you're able to see what actually happened. Now I'm going to take this same text, just going to duplicate it and bring it over here to show you. So now I'm going to resize it just a little bit, select both, and use my center option. Now that looks a little bit odd to me to the naked eye, so I'm just going to use my arrow keys and I'm going to bump it down just a little bit. You know, and each name or each text that you type out is going to vary in how it looks. It may be centered in one way, but it looks a little bit odd. Just because in this word it has a Y that hangs down and your center point's a little bit different. What you're looking for is you want to make sure that you have some overlap. And in this case, I could probably make it just a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to center align that. And now you can see, since I made it smaller, this doesn't attach up here. So I can either use my arrow keys and bump it up, or I can just increase the size just a little bit. Whatever your personal preference is, that is going to be what is going to make the difference. There is absolutely no perfect set size or magic number for every single design that you create because of different sizes, different text styles, different things like that. So now that I have my text how I would like it, I'm going to select both, right click, duplicate. This time I'm going to remember that duplicate just so I have a copy, select my original again, and now I'm going to weld it. So when we go to the Send tab, what you're going to see here is now both of these are going to cut in one solid piece. And that's going to be our next step. I am going to decide which one I want here. I was going to go with the rectangle, but now that I've made the oval, I kind of like that. So I know that my space for my design is actually 4 inches by 8 inches. So I'm going to come over here to my transform panel and scale option, or I can use the scale options in the top quick access toolbar. I'm just not used to the quick access toolbar as much. When I first started with the software, we didn't have that available. So I'm used to opening the panels and using them fully. But I click this little lock for the lock aspect, and then I'm going to change the height to 4. And when I do that, it's going to automatically rearrange the proportions for both the height and the width so that it keeps the design the same. And then I can just place it up here in my top left. I also like to use this transparency slider on the page setup panel so that I can gauge how much material I need when I'm going to cut this. Now I'm going to switch over to my document camera here, and we're going to get set up with my Cameo 4. So I have my Cameo 4 out of the box, ready to go. I have my piece. I'm going to be cutting on some blue sparkle vinyl that I have in my stash with me. I took the blue protective cover off my mat, and I'm just going to place this in the exact same location where my design is placed. I've cut my material down, and this will help with saving adhesive on your cutting mat because I'm not taking off a full sheet of material every single time I cut. So I use the transparency slider to count my squares, my 1-inch squares, to see how much material I need, and then I'm going to cut my material down and only place it in the area that I need it. Once I have that ready to go, I'm going to load this into my machine, and I'm going to press the load button, and we're going to go back into the software. And I can tell you that my piece of material is actually 9 inches long. So what I'm going to do, or 9 inches wide, so I have room to create this little, I'm going to type out a capital B. This is what I'm going to use for my test cut. I'm going to use a capital B that I've typed out for my test cut. If I go over here to the Send tab, it's showing I have no materials selected, or I was etching with my Curio before. I'm going to reach over and turn my Bluetooth on my Cameo 4, and then it's going to hopefully pick it up here in just a second. Sometimes I find if I choose my Cameo 4 USB connection, even though it's not plugged in, go back to my Bluetooth, it picks it up a lot faster. It's going to be syncing, it's going to check for firmware, and then it's going to show ready. Now, since I was using my Curio before, it has the acrylic etching setting that I was using. I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to change this to vinyl. And I'm going to try the vinyl glitter. It says a 4. I'm not sure I'll need a 4, but we can definitely try it out. Now, I typed out that capital B for my test cut. You could definitely use the test option down here, but I have found I just like to use the B. I'm going to select my design and I'm going to tell it to no cut. So the bold red line's turned off. I'm going to use the capital B. Let's go ahead and send this as a 4 and see what happens. So I'm going to click on send. I'm going to watch that the red line inside my auto blade adjusts to the correct number. And once it resets, I'm just going to go ahead and unload that and then turn this around a little bit and it's going to be hard for you to see. It's even hard for me, but that cut perfectly. This was a new material I had not cut before. I definitely recommend doing a test cut. With that test cut, it's going to save you some time, some materials, and definitely some frustration. So I'm just going to load my cut mat back in, and I'm going to move back to the software. My B is done, so I can really just move it off my cutting mat. But the reason I like this B is if I needed to, I could just move it down a little bit and I can send it again. Since it cut very, very well, I'm just going to go ahead and move it off the mat. I'm going to select my design and I'm going to choose cut. And then I'm going to send it. Once it's done, I'm going to go ahead and unload that. You could check if it was cut. It's always a good idea to actually check it before you unload. I get a little bit excited. I'm going to flip my mat over, and then I'm going to peel my mat away from my material. This will help in the material not curling and releasing from the mat. It's also going to save you some adhesive on your cutting mats. The next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and just weed this excess off. Normally I would cut this off and save it for a future project. I'm just going to do for this one, I'm just going to weed the outside. But you can definitely save your scraps, and I use my scraps all the time for different little projects. And then I'm just going to start, and when you're weeding, especially something like glitter or different things, you just want to be careful and go slow. Sometimes rolling it back can help, but you don't want to take out parts that aren't supposed to come out. So you want to go ahead and just start slow. Weeding does take practice, and you want to be careful because this is sticky and it will stick back to itself. This is weeding really, really nicely. I don't even need my weeding tool. So I'm just gonna kind of roll it back, get it started a little bit, and just go slow. The more you practice with it, the better you will get. And I know you always see videos on YouTube and different things, and they're never having any problems or any issues. Let me tell you, it's not always how it goes. Everybody does have an issue or runs into something or a design that doesn't weed properly. It just takes some practice to get the hang of. So now we have a vinyl decal that the text is welded into the shape. It all cut as one final piece. So next I'm going to apply some transfer tape. I just have this on a roll that I have with me. So I'm going to lay it down on top actually going to start over again. You can cut it down to size. I have mine, you can see I've used some of it before, so I'm just trying to conserve as much as I can on it. And so I'm just going to lay it down on top, roll it out to what I need, and then I'm going to take my scissors and cut that down. I used different kinds of transfer tape depending on my project. So this, I will put the link up for in the description as well as in the blog post on what I'm using. And you can go ahead and you can burnish it. I'm going to grab my squeegee, I'm just going to burnish it on top. And then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to burnish it on the back side. And then the next thing, I'm going to take it and I'm going to carefully peel. You want to go slow on this and make sure that nothing sticks to the backing. And this brand is really cut clean and it really worked well. Stuck to my transfer tape, and now it's ready to add to my finished project. You can lay it back down on your backing so it's protected, but now you have it off of the backing. Hopefully that's helped to give you a few tips and tricks in how to take some text and turn it into one solid continuous cut with a shape in the Silhouette Studio. For more tips, tutorials, and classes, check out my blog at www.silhouette-secrets.com. Thank you and have a great day.